we'll go ahead and get going. So thanks for joining. I'm Aaron with Cognition360. Hope everybody can hear me all right. Today, I've got Andrew Wallace from SmileBack. We're going to be talking about exploring the relationship between profitable MSPs and happy customers. We got Andrew on the left here with this cool picture, and me looking like a dork over here, just all suited up. It's pretty funny. So welcome, Andrew. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think I probably need a more professional picture is another way to look at this. But anyway.
You're relaxed. That's good. So today what we want to talk about and what you'll leave with today is going over how SmileBack is a tool that you can use to get feedback. But the idea is more what we want to talk about. So we're going to talk about gathering that feedback from your customers, analyzing that, and then leveraging that data. And that's the key thing. So because if you're gathering, you're analyzing, you're not doing anything with it. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. It doesn't have much impact. So then what we'd like to do at Cognition360, we're big data guys, data people. So what we like to do is kind of overlay that, like, where do we come in that picture? So we've got operational data, which means sales, finance, project, et cetera, where we can come in and take action and really drive deep into the business to understand how you can take that feedback and make it effective in your business. So that being said, I'm going to kind of hand it over to Andrew to start. But before we get there, I wanted to see just kind of how many of you today are already collecting feedback for your customers. Should see a poll up on the screen there. We'll let you guys kind of answer that as it's going through. Lessons learned. All right, Andrew, you want to pick that up?
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to take all of these windows that just popped up off my screen so I can see it. I was trying to vote. Yes,
it does look like, by the way, most of the audience is already collecting feedback in some way. So that's great to hear.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and it looks like Craig Isaacs is okay with the audio now, which is good. Yeah, so for any of you who don't know SmileBack, we've been around for a while in the space, roughly 5 years in the game in our current form, and we're a customer satisfaction system, especially for the MSP and IT service provider market. Those are the only markets we serve. That's where we specialize, and we're narrowly focused on feedback, which I think is important too. This is our specialty. We're just a very specific tool for a very specific job. And actually that's what makes it interesting about, say, partnering with people like Aaron and the team at Cognition360, because it gives the capabilities that SmileBack has a much broader and more meaningful range. We've worked with a ton of MSPs over that time. We have more than 1,000 customers today, and we've probably helped more than 5,000-10,000 over the course of our history. We have integrations with many of the PSA platforms in the space: ConnectWise, Autotask, Kaseya, Halo PSA, and even Zendesk and Freshdesk. I know for Cognition360, ConnectWise Manage is probably the only one that matters here, but nonetheless, we're broadly integrated. And then we have a bunch of other supporting integrations like Brightgauge, MS Teams, Power BI, Slack, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're actually part of the ConnectWise family, as ConnectWise likes to call it. I like to call them the corporate overlords, which they probably don't appreciate. Yeah, so they acquired SmileBack in November of last year, and I'm now part of the product team at ConnectWise, with my whole team just doing what I was doing before, which is driving this message around customer feedback in the marketplace. And so what is the idea? So basically SmileBack had a theory, or I had a theory, I guess, that I put into practice. And what's cool is there's data that informs this theory, but what Aaron can demo at the end here is actually proving the theory to a certain degree, and then proving it even specifically for your individual businesses. And so the whole point in my mind of feedback is in order to increase customer loyalty and retention. So the idea is that when you measure and manage your customer sentiment, that inherently leads to the ability to create a better customer experience. And what happens when you create a better customer experience, when you pay attention to the customer experience, when you focus on the customer experience, almost all businesses, and I have some statistics to back this up, see greater customer loyalty. And customer loyalty, especially in the MSP space, especially with small businesses, is generally the most important factor in a healthy business and in increasing revenue. So there's a causal chain from collecting feedback all the way to increased profitability and increased revenue. And so just to offer a few kind of supporting arguments for that, if you just want to go to the next slide, Aaron, some of the bullets here, some of the facts around why customer loyalty is important, especially given that in business today, there's so much talk about customer acquisition, which is also important. But I think it's interesting to remember that having a loyal customer base with longer customer lifetime value, et cetera, is actually far more efficient. It's more efficient in your operations and it's more efficient in your business finances itself. As some of these stats suggest, it's a lot easier to market and upsell and sell to your existing customers. They're much more likely to buy from you than a new customer or a new prospect is. It's significantly more expensive to acquire new customers, which especially SaaS startups like ours know all too well. And in all businesses, but particularly again in small business, and I think this is even be more true in the MSP IT service provider space, is that referrals, organic referrals, are a huge piece of growing a business and can often be the number one channel for acquiring new customers. This is true of SmileBack's business. It sounds like this is a lot of the time true for you as well, Aaron. Loyal customers not only grow over their lifetime with you themselves, increase revenue, build great relationships, they'll refer. And when we talk about NPS, this is an important way of getting those referrals.
For sure. So like, as we're going through this, if you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, Q&A, things like that. We'll make sure those get addressed either real time, if it makes sense, or just at the end. So we will get to all those questions as we go through here.
Cool. Yeah. And so then the customer experience piece, and I think this is an interesting statistic. I got this from Kaseya's benchmarking report, I think, is that actually only 38% of the market is tracking customer satisfaction at all. And this is really interesting because I don't know. I would have thought it's higher because SmileBack basically brought CSAT to the space. And we in the early years saw a lot of uptake on that. The theory I would put forward is just that generally it's like working out. You don't have to listen to your customers. You can have a business that works, that functions without even ever consulting your customers, ever thinking about your customers, as long as they're there. But if you invest, you see better results. And so what I mean by it's like working out, you don't have to live your life. You could never go to the gym and live a good life, a happy life. But generally, if you want your body to be better, you take it to the gym. And it's a practice, it's a discipline, and it's not something you need, but it's something you probably should do. And I think that's an interesting thing. And so internal problems can often be more pressing, more urgent than external problems. And
I also think it's kind of hard to set up. Or at least it was. So I'm going to date myself a little bit. I haven't had an MSP in 5 or 6 years, but when I had it, you guys weren't around, I don't think. But it was very manual to set up the survey. And then what do you put on the survey? And you kind of get bogged down in the weeds. I mean, we had our first survey that we did, 12, 13 years ago. It was like 15 questions. And it was like, well, I want to know this and this experience and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure we can kind of get to that later. But the point is that it was such an involved process just to build the survey and figure out how do we get it in front of the customer that, everybody kind of generally knows, like, oh, Yelp is out there. Google reviews are there. Reviews are a thing that people talk about, 1 star, 5 star, whatever. But actually doing it and making it happen is kind of a different story. So that might be why it's only 38%. That is kind of shockingly, sadly low to me, that people aren't asking their customers that.
Well, and I think historically, to the point you're making too, surveying has been a labor intensive, a poor user experience. So you got bad data. No one liked to do it. And I think that's probably still true. If you look at marketing surveys, I think it's considered good to be above 3% in terms of response rate. Whereas with SmileBack CSAT surveys, you're closer to 42% on average. And I think we've done a lot of work to make it simple, to make it effective, to make it easy. But we also, and this is where I think SmileBack has responsibilities, I need to be out there driving in the market like this, why to do it, how to make it easy, giving thought leadership around what you can do, which is we're going to talk about a bit later with the surveys as well. So there's this constant educating the market on how client sentiment can help businesses and why you do want to do it, because as I said, you don't need to. And I think to that second point there, brand loyalty is becoming the number one indicator, or customer satisfaction is becoming the number one indicator of brand loyalty. So more and more and more companies are expecting a really good client or customer experience. And I think this has been a lot driven by B2B internet businesses that have really focused on good UX and some of the things you said earlier, Yelp, Trustpilot, Google reviews. People expect to be able to go to a company and understand if they provide a good experience. And now now it's like table stakes and even at a higher level, it's a differentiator. And that kind of is the next point too, whereas price or product or just being able to provide a necessary service was sufficient to win business and to do that well. Now you need to do that with a good client experience. And so the market is changing, not just in our space, but more broadly speaking. And what I did find interesting, kind of the polar opposite response to only 38%, is that just by virtue of like trying to improve your customer experience, just by paying attention to it, almost every single company that does that sees an increase in revenue. And so it's like an easy thing. It's okay, I'm just going to put some attention into this and I see a result. That result could be big, that could be small. With better tooling like Cognition360 provides, you can actually get more sophisticated on that. But there is just a general relationship between paying attention to customer experience, more money, which is kind of nice.
Yep.
And then where I think SmileBack comes in terms of what we do and how we make it easy is that we give the customer a voice. We allow MSPs or our customers to identify issues and also to identify issues and fix them, and then also identify opportunities to keep doing what they do. What you do not so good, fix that. What you do really well, lean into that. And in the process, improve client relationships, increase customer retention, and then this piece around NPS referrals is grow the business. It can also be a marketing function, a marketing and sales function, which is another piece that I've been trying to push in the market, is identify those customers who are happy customers, who are highly profitable, and get them to refer you new business.
Right. Yeah. So I've been talking with MSPs from a consultative perspective for about 5 or 6 years. And then most recently from a kind of a data perspective, but still consultative. And so when people come to me, they're like, hey, here's my MSP and whatever it looks like, how do we improve this MSP? And I always say like, well, what are your customers telling you? Because that's a gold mine. And even more so, almost, it's great to throw up on the screen, like, hey, I've got 98% satisfaction rate or things like that. But that negative feedback is so valuable to point you in directions of like, what does it feel like to be my customer? Because a lot of people get so in the weeds, they don't even think about things like, hey, pick up the phone and call your help desk number. Like, what is that experience like? And I think Jeff Bezos said something to the effect of, be your customer in your own mind, and that will drive your business. So that customer-led first thing is, I strongly believe that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the negative feedback, and I actually think the negative feedback is more valuable than the positive. And we have content in our content hub around, why negative feedback is so valuable and what to do with it. Because at first I think it can be a little bit like, but in my team, we use SmileBack. We have weekly L10 meetings. And one of the things we do every week as part of the customer headlines is review as a team any negative or neutral CSAT reviews. And that's generally where we get the most insights into the customer customer mindset into the areas that we need to do better. So yeah, and that's an example actually of exactly this, which is collecting feedback. So that's the first pillar, getting data, and then assessing the feedback, right? What does it mean? And then lastly, what do we do with it? And so going through that process with my team every week is, if we get a red, we've got it, we've looked at it. Why did they leave us a red? What does it say in the comments? Does it correlate to anything? Is it a trend with anything else? And then what do we do about it? How are we addressing that with the customer? But there's many ways to look at that. So in terms of collecting feedback, the next slide, I think the key thing here, and to get to some of the stuff we're going to talk about later, is you really need to use an established, standardized way, because that way you can trust the results, you can leverage best practices to scale the results, you can build off what others are doing, sort of what I described there with practices, and you can benchmark, most importantly. So that's why you want these effective, established feedback mechanisms. And then once you get that and you're assessing the data, so the next slide, you want to have things, oh, whoops, I forgot. Anyway, this is a CSAT survey. You've probably all seen it. It measures a transaction. Usually it's like, how did we do on this request? How did we do on this ticket? And it's just very simple, positive, neutral, negative. This is the established methodology for customer satisfaction, and it gives you a score. And then NPS is not as widely used in the industry, but is gaining traction, and is also gaining traction more broadly. You probably, I say a lot of companies now are carpet bombing the internet with NPS surveys. They're doing way too many of them. So you go on a website and you get one of these surveys, right? And it's a very powerful methodology, Net Promoter Score, created by Bain Capital, and it measures a business relationship. So whereas CSAT is the date, NPS is the relationship on a whole, and it's important to get both, so you have a 360 view. It's a little more complicated into some of the things I think you were saying earlier, Aaron. Right. It takes a little more understanding. There's a little more complexity that comes with it, but it's still something.
I've heard people get confused, like, hey, my MSP is at a 70, and it's like, well, you might think a 70 is like a C, like in terms of school, but a 70 is actually really good because it's from a negative 100 all the way up to a positive 100. And a lot of people just don't kind of get through all those weeds of how that works. And so they're like, I'm just not going to do NPS. And it's like, well, probably should check that, just a thermometer test once a year.
Totally. And I would do it a little more than once a year. I would do it quarterly is the typical way, but yeah. And as you say, 70 is a great score, generally speaking. It's an incredible score in the MSP industry. And that's one of the important things about benchmarking is you need to be able to benchmark against industry and against geography with NPS. And there's a lot of data and stuff out there. We provide a bunch of it at SmileBack. But for instance, like SmileBack's NPS is 70, which is really good for software as a service. A really good score for an MSP would be anywhere from 30 to 50 just by nature of the industry. Whereas something like Tesla, Apple, Southwest Airlines, some of the best brand experience companies they're up closer to 100, and so yeah, it really depends where you are in terms of benchmarking and what a good score is. It isn't like objectively true that one score is better than another.
Right. You like cats.
Yeah. I call them my feedback cats. And so there's a whole bunch of things you can do with assessing feedback. But the key things are around insights, unearthing those insights for the testimonials about your business, noticing trends, driving segmentation, especially if you're a larger business, say with different business lines or different offices, looking at your overall customer experience, as we've mostly been talking about. And then even if you want to look internally, looking at your team's performance, right? Which agents are getting the best CSAT scores? Which agents are getting the most reviews? What are customers saying about those specific agents? And yeah, we see some customers do some pretty interesting things with the team performance piece. And we also have leaderboards and basic functionality built right into the product, or you can pull that data and put it in other places as well. And then last but not least, leveraging feedback. So this is the most important piece. Is you don't want to just get the data and put it on a wall because you need to do things with it. Otherwise, it's just vanity metrics. And the key places that we typically see people taking action is in their client relationships, whether it's in QBRs, sending reporting, whatever. As I've talked about earlier, driving marketing and sales by identifying opportunities or leveraging things like our automated Google reviews feature. And then on a more internal level, looking at those pain points in the business vis-a-vis the customer experience in order to build workflows, build business processes, and potentially automate them right in the product from SmileBack to Manage or anywhere else.
Great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about like what does Cognition do and how do we manage that data. So I'll talk real quick at a very high level. What Cognition360 does is we pull data out of ConnectWise and we assess that and look at that kind of from different angles. So there's the project manager angle, there's the financial angle, there's service ops angle. Every single type role there has some reports that we then pull that data out of and use that lens to show those people, here's kind of where your business is headed. Here's where it was trending. And so we can do trending and forecasting and all that kind of stuff based on your data. We give 130 plus different reports out of the gate. So you come on board with us and we spit those reports back out to you. And then you can use that in an ongoing way. We're essentially your reporting solution. So one of the things I wanted to talk with Andrew about today is really making sense of that data and how you can use feedback data to really kind of drive the product. So just to kind of give you a feel, I'm going to share my screen here real quick. So this is the agreement profitability one, which we can pull effective rates and margin and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to kind of go deep into that. Part of this is we can pull your team data to see what's realized, what's not. And again, this is just baked into the product. We have tons of different ways to look at that. We can divvy that up by team and all this kind of stuff. But circling back to what we were talking about today, if you come in here and you look at this is your CSAT based on margin of the client. So it's kind of an interesting way. I like to kind of call it a reverse metric, where you're basically saying, hey, I really want my really profitable customers that have been around a long time to be happy. And that's just a general thing that you want. So in order to pull that data, I have to, number one, know what their margin is and things like that. But so if you kind of reverse that and say, well, my customers that are low margin, what is their client experience like? So this data is generally 88%. So that's still fairly high. So this MSP is actually providing pretty good service in general. But from a 0 to 30%, you can see, and then I'm going to jump up. So in other words, they're making 22% margin on these clients, pretty low. And then I'm going to jump up to the next tier. You're at 51%. Margin, you're slightly moving up, and your average time that you've had that customer is actually moving up as well. And you keep going, and the margin keeps going up. Right, the higher the CSAT score, the higher the agreement margin, which is kind of interesting because you would think the more I'm servicing this client, the more I'm spending time on them, the less I should be profitable. But it's actually the reverse. It's to your point earlier, it's easier to upsell them on other things. They stay with you longer. They're more forgiving on projects, and they're not going to nitpick through every single thing like they would before. And those are kind of how we break that up. And so we've got these different metrics that kind of group these based on their CSAT group. Where do they line up? And you can kind of really deep dive in. And then what we want to do is correlate this to other operational data. So if these customers are low margin and they're not happy, well, why? Let's go jump into those CSAT scores, look into those tickets, work with those technicians. Did we work on something too long? And at a Cognition, we can service that kind of stuff up pretty quickly. So we'll show you that information, and it's part of something that we'll go through. Does that make sense what I'm talking about there, Andrew?
Yeah, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Although 88 CSAT is not very good for an MSP, which is interesting. Really? Yeah, so that low profit or that low margin is correlated to what would be considered a mediocre CSAT score in the MSP industry. You want to be up around 95 or above.
Yep. Makes sense. So I'm going to jump into some questions here while we're doing that. If you're interested in hearing more about Cognition360, I'm going to throw up a poll here. Just fill in that form. So we got a question here about, I believe this is for you. What are the future goals to allow branching logic or better solutions for those who want better opportunities to train staff, like on timeliness, ticket resolve before closing, ticket close without communicating, etc.?
So I'm not exactly sure what that question means. So in terms of branching, go ahead. No, you.
Well, I was just going to say, to me, I interpret that question as, hey, I might want to have different surveys go out based on different things that happen within ConnectWise or whatever the ticketing system may be. And is there a certain NPS score or sorry, not score, NPS thing that we could submit to them? Sounds like more of a roadmap question. If that's not right, just kind of update that in here.
Yeah, and EJ just said correct. So customization of questions is, and this is something we see from power users generally. So I'm assuming EJ has a pretty mature operation if they're looking to these kind of things. So yeah, customization is on the current roadmap, a late 2022. No, what year is it this year? No, okay, this year. No, so it's next year, 2023 item on the roadmap in terms of the way we've been thinking about it. And it will come with actually moving some of the capabilities to the platform, the ASIO platform at ConnectWise, that will allow us to integrate more deeply into different aspects of the operations, because right now we're so tied to just the closing of a ticket through the managed PSA. That's how we activate the CSAT survey. Some of the things though, to timeliness, ticket resolve before closing, etc. We've been thinking about building some kind of like structured data modules or tagging capabilities in the platform so that they can segment better. Currently today as well, what some users do is they use our existing tagging on the internal side. So you can go into the tickets and tag them like timeliness, ticket resolve before closing, ticket close without communicating, in order to build that structured data to allow more analysis of the business in this kind of way. And then that data could be those tags that can write back to manage them. That data could be pulled into Cognition or BrightGauge or somewhere else.
So timeliness meaning something like how quickly you got to my ticket. I'm giving you feedback on that.
Yeah. And another thing we thought about from the end user perspective, and so I'm just sharing ideas at this point, but is to actually have those structured points. So you could go in and say, when the user fills out the survey, they go positive, and then they could kind of like Uber, right? You could put politeness, timeliness, communication, et cetera, the same way you could with Uber or Amazon. They're already selected for you. So the end user does the tagging job for you, which I think would be pretty powerful.
Yeah, makes sense. Reshare my screen. So I thought he was talking about this type of timeliness, which is timeliness of technicians putting time into the system, because that could correlate back to that. That's why I just had this up on the screen. I didn't realize I was sharing the screen the whole time. Well, thanks. So if you guys are interested in hearing more about SmileBack, just threw the last one up on the screen there. Fill that out. SmileBack is a great tool. We actually use it internally at Cognition360. Andrew, I don't even know if you knew that. We use it all the time. We get great surveys every day and wonderful feedback. How do you? You mentioned you're at 30-40% response rate. How are you kind of coaching people to do that?
So 42% is the average. We do have some best in class who are up at 50-60%, which is incredible.
Insane.
And though the way it works is it's a little deceiving because we don't have the data on surveys sent from Manage. We can only see surveys viewed. So it's if they viewed a survey and responded. So what I call the real response rate is a little bit lower. But the way we coach is to systematize it. So it needs to happen in the same pattern all the time. And that's why we recommend just doing it on the closure of every single ticket. So it trains your customer what to expect. We also recommend onboarding the survey, and we have templates that you can use in our content hub around just educating when you initially start surveying, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it will help your client in the end, right? You're doing this not just for yourself, but them, so you can improve the service you give to them. And then lastly, also to create education campaigns ongoing. You can't just set it and forget it, unfortunately. You need to be consistently going back to your clients in the quarterly business reviews, say a newsletter. I know Graham Lane in the UK, he always has a section in his monthly newsletter that shows back the CSAT scores with some of the reviews and saying like, thank you for providing this information. Yeah. This is how we took action on it. So just constantly reinforcing it.
That part's important, letting the client know that you actually listened. Because I've seen people say, I didn't think anybody was checking these. Because I would follow up on some that were low and it'd be like, oh, I didn't even mean to click that, but I didn't know somebody even cared.
And that's the best. The best is just positive reinforcement. So rewarding the behavior, so that when they give feedback, they see action, good or bad.
Just like with my kids.
It's just, I was going to say, it's like training a puppy. It's totally the same thing. And it's the same. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to call your clients kids or puppies, but it's exactly that. It's just positive reinforcement.
Yep. Gotcha. So, last question is, how long does it take to implement SmileBack?
So for CSAT, you could be up and running, I'd say in 3 minutes, and do it all on your own, from going to smileback.com, starting a free trial. The only thing you really need to do is to input your API key for Manage, and then it's 3 steps to set up the survey. You just click a bunch of tick marks, copy and paste the snippet back into Manage, and boom, you're done. MPS survey, so you could be literally getting feedback on tickets within 3 to 5 minutes. And then I'd say MPS takes about 15 minutes, just because there's a few more steps to setting up those surveys. And we usually suggest setting up your CSAT, then a couple weeks later, starting with MPS.
Yep. 15 minutes, huh? I think I can cover.
It's not that much. Yeah. Yeah, and we can do it for you too. You could just call up Evan and my customer team, and they'll set it up with you on a call.
That's so awesome. Great. Well, thanks for joining me today. So if you got colleagues that would be interested in this content for today, we'll be sending out the recording later to everybody. So thanks for coming out, and we appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Aaron.
Bye.